Hi, good morning. Welcome to our webinar, What I Wish I Knew About Navigating Law Firms. I'm Ryan from Pizzuli, Staff Assistant of the Institute for Energy Law, which is an institute of the Center for American and International Law. This program is hosted by the Law School Outreach Subcommittee of IEL's Young Energy Professionals Practice Committee. Our moderator today is Justin Marocco. Justin is a partner in the Baton Rouge office of Jones Walker. Justin has a wide-ranging practice, primarily focusing on handling a broad array of complex commercial litigation in the energy, maritime, construction, and environmental sectors. He has significant experience litigating cases in federal and state courts. Justin also regularly advises clients on legal and regulatory issues in connection with carbon sequestration, storage, and enhanced recovery projects, as well as other large energy infrastructure projects. As part of that practice, he routinely advises clients on both the legal and regulatory aspects of their projects throughout all stages, including Class 6 well permitting, land acquisition, expropriation, and pipelines. I'll now turn it over to Justin to introduce the other panelists.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it, and thank you everyone for joining us today for the this panel presentation. I'm joined with three esteemed panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So, Wendy, how about we start with you, and then we'll go down the line.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Wright. I am a partner at McGuireWoods. I'm in our healthcare department. I have always been a practicing healthcare attorney, started out day one, mid-sized law firm, where I focused mainly on physician practice management and then hospital acquisitions of physician practices. Moved over to a larger firm in my second year and started focusing on academic medical centers, hospitals and health system work, doing a lot of the regulatory work, so payment and reimbursement, scope of practice, fraud and abuse laws. And then I came to McGuireWoods in 2018, where I expanded my practice to include a lot of private equity invested in healthcare transactions, but still doing a lot of provider side work and then doing advice and counseling on compliance with healthcare laws.
All right, Nish, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Bhan. I'm a senior associate with Baker Botts in our New York office and formerly was in the Houston office. I'm a civil litigator and trial lawyer. My practice primarily includes representation of energy companies, especially in construction litigation and construction disputes. Also do a good amount of trade secrets work and intellectual property litigation disputes counseling.
And last but certainly not least, Tamiko, you want to go?
Sure. Thank you, Justin. My name is Tamiko Reeves-Sobers. Thank you all for joining. I am a partner at Clifford. I've been here for 4 months. Prior to that, I started my career as an environmental regulatory lawyer at Baker Botts, where Nischay is now, and got my fill of environmental and occupational health and safety on the regulatory and quasi-litigation side, like administrative law and things like that. About 3 years into my career, I moved over to Kirkland and Ellis, where I practiced for the bulk of my career on more transactional work. So identifying environmental and occupational health and safety risks in a variety of private equity, real estate, finance, and capital markets transactions. As I mentioned, I moved over to Clifford very recently to lead up the U.S. environmental health and safety practice, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And as you can see, for those attending, you got varied practices. You've got corporate, you've got litigation, so varied perspectives for you in providing the advice that we're gonna be here today. And so mainly the four things that we're kind of looking at in this presentation. We're going to look at communication, which is a huge part of being a lawyer, effective stress management, ways you can kind of manage your time and manage your stress, which is just an inherent part of being a lawyer. Relationship building, and then professional and personal development. But before we get into those, kind of as a kickoff question for the panel, what are some of the characteristics that y'all see that separate a good young associate from a great young associate? Someone wants to kick us off.
I'll start. And so for me, I think, especially with a young associate where you're still kind of limited in what your skill set it's your attitude, I think, what separates a good young associate from a great young associate. The enthusiasm, positive attitude will carry you very, very far in picking up the resources you need to become, more substantively skilled. And so I love to see a young associate that's very engaged, asking questions, raising their hand for opportunities, and generally maintaining a positive attitude.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Tameka. I think 95% of this job for, a large part of your early career is attitudinal, right? And that is truly the way that you're going to distinguish yourself from, your peers and colleagues, right? Everyone, for the most part, who is going to law school is driven, smart, they can read at least, right? But what distinguishes, a great associate from a good one is, are they willing to do the work? Are they willing to communicate and, take ownership for a team that they're on? Are they willing to dive in, even if it's a scary or daunting prospect, which when you're starting your career, everything is scary and daunting. So I think everyone here would probably agree attitude is key, especially at the beginning, before you have the substantive chops.
And I'll add to that. So in complete agreement, but I'll add to that detail oriented. And what I mean by that is that the other panelists are right. We're not expecting someone to come in and have all the substantive knowledge, especially if you work on the transactional side where you went to law school and now have to figure out how to actually do your job every day. And so someone that's detail oriented, for me, that means they're getting the small wins. Are you doing the stuff that you know how to do, i.e. reading and writing? Are you making sure there are no errors? Are you making sure you're turning in things timely? Be detail oriented is when you get an assignment, right? A lot of the times we give things on the fly. Everything's not always packaged up nicely, but surprise, it's not packaged up nicely for us from our clients. And so making sure you understand the scope of the assignment, and then also are looking for anything that are holes that I haven't done already, right? So just being very focused on the details, and then being extra careful with the work that you actually turn in. Yes, I know a lot of people say, and this is some personality specifics, that, oh, it's just a draft, or, oh, it's just I just need it quick. It doesn't matter what the work product looks like. But in my career as a young associate at a law firm, the amount of Wendy did something to organize work for herself that got flipped to clients because it looked work ready and it looked put together, that we could flip it, oh, well, we actually have something we can give to you, happened to me a lot. So just being very detail oriented, I think can make you stand out a bunch among a crowd of people who are actually very, very smart. So, right, that's the baseline.
Yes, and I think just jumping off of those, I completely agree. Attitude wise, I always would prefer a young associate who is over eager to, hey, what about this? If they see that they've done something in the past, when you start off, you're not going to know. I mean, like Wendy said, whether it's litigation or transactional, you go to law school and then you come to the job to learn how to actually be a lawyer. You learn to think like a lawyer in law school. You learn to be a lawyer on the job. So you're not going to know from the start. But once you start doing things, once or twice or three times, you'll start noticing a general trend or pattern. And so I'd rather, if the associate comes and says, well, I know we did this in the past, what about doing this again? Or do we need to do this? Or just start thinking ahead of anticipating what the partner or senior associate that you're working under needs. It makes their job easier. And so the easier that you can make their job, the better that the better you're going to look, and ultimately kind of the more work you're going to get. And then kind of just hitting on the detail oriented. Completely agree. This job, I mean, that's what we get paid to do is to be the details. It's not to be the quickest if the answer is wrong or just badly styled. So don't turn anything in that you haven't read over yourself. And honestly, to the extent you can, get someone else to review it, because there's a habit when you read your own work, you know what it's supposed to say. And so in your mind, that's what you read, but it may not say that. So to the extent you can, have someone else, whether it's your another associate who might be willing to help you, or you're all going to have legal assistants, secretaries, professional assistants, to the extent they can utilize those resources so that when you do turn in work, it's not don't ever turn in a first draft that hasn't been read, hasn't been looked at for grammar or anything, because that's a first way easy to differentiate yourself if you do have that ability. And we kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of communicating. One of the big areas that I've noticed that oftentimes young associates kind of stumble is with that communication aspect. So let me ask y'all, what are some of the mistakes that y'all find, or some of the good things that y'all find that most new or young attorneys make when it comes to communicating, whether it's about projects or just general intra-firm communication?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think one of the biggest hurdles when you're a more senior person, you're dealing with the person who's just started, is that oftentimes people who are just starting are sort of intimidated to ask questions or to communicate. I suppose fearing that it betrays some sort of lack of understanding of either the assignment or is. I think the truth is that no one ever expects a junior associate or especially a summer associate to come into this job knowing everything. And to the extent possible, we would encourage people to ask questions, to communicate, especially I think about availability and capacity. For me, those are the two biggest ones for junior associates, where I notice that they don't do a great job communicating. I think there's like this natural tendency to be afraid to say, oh, I'm overloaded, or like I'm running late on what I thought I would get to you by X date. And I think that there's a capacity that, when you're more senior and very busy, right? I mean, there's a capacity to give people grace, but if you're not told what's needed, it's impossible to give that grace, right? And I think the worst thing that can happen is, you promise something to a client based on a deliverable timeline that you're given by someone more junior, and then they blow that deadline, or it's the day before and they're like, hey, I need XYZ more time, right? If you communicate early and you communicate often, you're going to avoid sort of potential pitfalls that come with that. And I know for me personally, that's like a constant source of frustration. I would rather have someone tell me that, something's going to take longer than they think, or that they're running into issues, than be silent about it and suffer in silence.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. And I think, Tamika, I think I saw you unmuted, so I'll let you.
I think Nish hit it on the head. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I will add that one of the things that I see that's not necessarily a mistake but comes up more with a great young associate that we were mentioning before, is that person who asks questions when I give them the assignment, and then they take it back, they think through it for a little bit, and then they come back and they ask me more questions instead of using up their time and coming to me, like Nish said. Maybe they don't need an extension, but they come to me at the deadline and they have a ton more questions that we could have talked through as the time went on, and they would have been further along, moving the ball along. So I think part of that, Nish, is communicating early and often, but also thinking about how you can move the ball forward and using good checkpoints for communication along the way. And then Nish also mentioned communicating when you're overloaded. That is key, right? At the end of the day, we have to deliver a product to the client. And if I've given you a deadline, I'm kind of relying on your deadline to meet my deadline. And so communicating when you're overloaded, communicating when we have something come in that's a rush project, and maybe it comes in at 4:00, or maybe it comes in on a Friday, and just something quick saying got it, or will do, or something like that lets me know it's off my plate and onto yours, I think is a really good communication skill for young associates to have.
Yeah, and one that's a great point, Tamika. Just if you get an email and they ask, hey, can you do this? Just a simple, yep, I've got it, just to let them know, because the amount of times that you would think that it's, you might think, well, that's silly, no one would ever, but the amount of times you send something and you think it gets lost in the ether and you don't hear about it, and they're actually doing it, that the associate is actually doing the work, but they never let you know. As a partner, you're like, well, now I got to get someone else. And so you end up getting someone else, and you run into this lack of communication on both ends can get everyone in trouble. So just a simple, hey, got it. Hey, looking into it. But I didn't want to hit, we talked about the availability and capacity and what happens if you're overloaded, because you will reach a point. No one ever likes to say no. That's what, you know, most of the time that's why we went to law school, because we're type A people and why we want to do this. But any advice that y'all have in terms of messaging when you do, let's say you are overloaded, you know, and you may not, honestly, you're going to learn your lesson the hard. This is how I felt as an associate. When I was an associate, you don't know what your limit is until you hit your limit, and then you know from there. So this is more of after you've learned your limit, unfortunately, and you realize you're overloaded. What advice do y'all have for young attorneys and how to message that? Because certainly you don't just want to say no, can't do it. That's not going to go over well. But there is a way to finesse it. So any advice that y'all have on that front?
I've got some. So you definitely don't want to say no, right? 'Cause you don't want to be the person that everyone's like, every time I give them assignment, they just tell me no. So let me move on to the next person who will actually take it. Something that I would do often is to say, I would love to do X, but you know, A, B, and C is also on my plate. Let me know, right? Let the other person weigh in on whether they think you have time. Like you might be like, I really don't have time. And they can maybe have someone that's lined up. We know that how work gets allocated at law firms is not always equitable. And usually there are people who really need work and could take on an assignment versus people who are overloaded. And then if it's a matter of getting staffed, making sure you're communicating with the partners, right? I do deal work, so they're different partners running different deals, and you could be staffed across a lot of partners. So sometimes having those partners have that conversation, right? Raising it to one and saying, hey, like this, I am struggling. This is what's really going on. I'm up every night till 4. I just don't know that I'm going to be able to do it. But I also don't want to let down my team, and having that partner go have the conversation and having the partners figure out how do we make this workable for the associate. And so you are one step removed and you're still never saying no. You're giving the partners the opportunity to correct the mistake, because we, at least at my firm, I know some firms work differently, but we don't have project managers, right? It's your partners trying to project manage. And unfortunately, we're moving in a lot of directions and don't always get to talk with each other about what's on everyone's plate.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Wendy. And I think one of the things I like doing is at the very front end, like as soon as I'm, you know, if I know that I'm going to be slammed or not available for a certain period of time, I like to message that by saying, you know, this is what I have on my plate. What is the expected turnaround for this project? And, you know, I think it's feasible that I could carve out this much time. Does that work with the client's expectations, and does that work with your expectations? And if you're very clear on the front end, like, you know, this is my availability, this is what this week looks like, this is what, you know, the broader framework of my month looks like. And obviously that's easier on the litigation side when you have sort of these huge deadlines that you know about months in advance. I know that's not always the case for our friends on the transactional side, but I think being able to message that and doing it in a way where you're making it clear, I'm not just rejecting work offhandedly, you know, I have a lot on my plate and I want to make sure I do a good job. I think people are going to recognize that, you know, you're not treating it flippantly, and you're not you know, saying no just to keep to your like narrow 40 hours a week to make your hours or whatever. So I think as long as you're appropriate in terms of how you message things, that can go a long way. And if you're clear about your limits and what's on your plate, partners are going to appreciate that for sure.
And that all just gets back to the attitude of just, you know, hey, I would love to do your work. I'd love to do it. Here's what I've got. And sometimes it's hey, I know you said if they gave you a turnaround and maybe the turnaround is you can't meet it. You know, you can't meet it. Hey, I can do it, but I can get it to you at this point. Is that possible? And sometimes because it may just be kind of a general white paper going to a client that just explaining an area of the law that they just told the client they get it to them on Wednesday, and they're like, sure, I can tell the client we'll get it to them on. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, but sometimes that can often be it, and you can fit it within your schedule with your current workload that you have going on. Now, but sometimes, unfortunately, you know, at this job you are going to have where it's going to be high stress, high workload moments. So let's transition to a little bit of the effective stress management. So let's start off with just what are some of the ways and practices that y'all have implemented to help manage just the inherent stress of being a lawyer. I mean, it's part of the job, unfortunately. So how do you and the job is to how do we manage that? So what are some of the practices y'all implement to deal with that?
I've got one that's specific to work. So the way I manage a lot of my work stress, so I'm very type A, very anxious, anxiety, right, through the roof. I'm a lawyer. Is having processes in place. So things that I know are sticking points for me. So for example, when I was a super young attorney, asking for assignments just created all this extra stress in my life that like was unbelievable. And so instead I'd say, okay, on Monday I have a timer. It's on the, it's on the calendar. It says ask for additional work, right? Just make it a habit. Some of the other things that are very work specific is having a process as a regulatory lawyer for doing really big regulatory projects. Okay, this is my process. I will think for 30 minutes, do a Google search, get myself comfortable, then I'll do statutes, then I'll do regs, and I'll write it down and make it very process driven so that I'm taking some of the anxiety of the big project out of the picture. And it becomes, this is the model for how you do the work. And so not getting into like personal stress management stuff, but just how do you actually stress manage your day? Having processes in place are your friends. When do you figure out what you need to do for the week? Does that need to be a Sunday, night thing? Does it need to be a Monday morning thing? How are you going to look at what the priority is for the day? So just having processes in place to make our lives make more sense than everyone needs something all the time is a great stress reducer for me. But I also think that plays into my personality type. So
I agree. And I will add to that, Wendy, that I block off chunks of my calendar, right? So especially at my new firm, I've realized that they have a habit of, they see something available on your calendar. So there's no, hey, when are you available for this call? It's like, oh, I see a slot on your calendar. I'm going to grab that. And sometimes you might have a call right before that and right after that, and they seize that little 30-minute window that you thought you might have a break. And for me, a lot of the stress that's inherent as a transactional lawyer like Wendy comes from back to back to back, no time for a breath. And so I find that a work-related, I guess we'll talk about personal later, but a work-related practice that I've implemented is the same as Wendy, a type of process or procedure is blocking off those times in between my calendar. Or first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening before I log off, and like understanding my priorities for the day, or taking a breath so I can go get a glass of water so that I don't have those calls back to back, is a huge stress relief for me just during my day, because I can find sometimes that, I start getting on the phone at 9 a.m. and then I kind of look at my calendar and go, wait, do I really have a call, right after each other until the end of the day? That's really not okay. And so a good stress relief for me is finding those times. Once those calls start appearing on my calendar, if I notice a little 30-minute or 15-minute break in between, I block it. So then it's just for me and no one else can have it. And I find that helps me a ton.
Those are great suggestions. And that like back to back to back to back to back day, those are the hardest. I think for me, frankly, it all kind of comes down to time management. And for me, it is about prioritization and then triaging, understanding, what tasks are more important, what you need to make sure gets done, for, assuming you have multiple competing obligations, which you always do, right? So understanding like the weight that has to be given to each of these, and, which one is going to be more research intensive, which one, if something is client facing, does it need to be, in a way that a client's going to be able to understand it, and does that take more time? So for me, it's like prioritize and triage, figure out what tasks can be pushed to later, what tasks need to be done sooner, and what you may need more insight from the team on, stuff like that. Another tip that I have, and this is, I don't know if this is just like a personal quirk, but I hate having for my work email I hate having like a bunch of unread emails. So I make sure that all my Outlook inbox is always marked as read, unless it is like a priority thing I need to come back to, in which case I leave it on unread. So then I go to my phone and I'm like, mark as unread. And I'm like, okay, these are the 6 emails of like the tasks I need to do. Or sometimes I'll email myself tasks and like keep it as unread. So I'm like, okay, I need to do this, this, and this. I'm not like the most naturally organized person. So creating these sort of forced tools of organization and structure really is very helpful for me, because otherwise I can sometimes be all over the place, right? So you kind of have to know yourself and create tools and advantages that work for you.
And Nish, you're not alone in that. I was with someone who just had their phone and they had 32,000 unread emails, and that just causes me internal anxiety to have that many emails unread, just even a few. So yeah, just reading it just to figure out, even if I'm not going to deal with it, just having read it and then have a task for myself. Okay, do this later. And you mentioned, I think it was Wendy, about Sunday night, kind of, that is when I honestly, my kids go to bed. I've got 4 kids, so the weekends are crazy with kid stuff. So, but they go to bed at Sunday night, and that's when I'll log on and I'll just plan out. I'm not doing any substantive work. I'm just planning out my Monday. It's kind of just figuring out, what am I going to do? What do I have on my plate? What do I need to prioritize? And just because it's easy to go into Monday, you start the week off strong with something. And I'll even send emails. My assistant she'll get emails from me Sunday night at like 9 p.m. knowing that she doesn't see it till Monday, but she just knows that's kind of the time I do it and kind of plan everything out. And I'll do it during the evenings, during the day, the weekdays too, just because I like going in with a plan. But I'll always caveat it. So, I'll send, if I have an assignment that I need an associate to do, I'll send, like last night, I sent an email to an associate, hey, take a look at this. I just need you to research this issue for me. Just make sure I'm and just give this a look over before we send it to the client. And then I put in there in bold and underline, do not do this on Sunday evening. This is strictly this is for Monday. I am just sending it because this is just works for me. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to make you do work at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. So I always try to caveat it with that if I do send those emails. And it's not something that's a rush. Just, hey, don't worry about this till tomorrow. This is just me getting ahead and getting ready for the week. We kind of looked at the professional aspects of stress management. What about the personal? And I'll kind of start off with this one too to get the discussion started. Kind of the personal I talked about, and it's changed obviously since when I started my career. I didn't have any kids, and now I have 4 under the age of 7. And so my personal stress management, sometimes it's probably more stressful at home. But the time, maybe in the past I would dedicate an hour to just maybe read or do, it's a lot of, spending time with my kids just because I want to do that to the extent I can. So I'll leave work. I'll come into work earlier. My kids get up at 6 in the morning. They go to bed at 8. So I'll come into work around 7:30, which is actually some of the most peaceful time. You'll realize it's before it's kind of like the stock market. The bell rings at about 8:30, and then everything gets insanity for the next 8 hours. So sometimes that's the best time to even to do a little bit more of that planning for work or get actual deep thought work done. But I'll I try to get home so I can see my kids before they go to bed and do that. And then sometimes I'll jump back on if I do have stuff. I'll try to put that away. I'm at home, with my kids. I try to put all that away. And then I'll jump on, do maybe an hour of work or plan out the next day after they go to bed, and then watch a TV show. But one thing you do have to do, and they always, when I started, piece of advice they always gave me is make sure to find something you love to do, and you need to intentionally carve out that time. So like, I do not miss LSU football games. I do not miss Saints football games. Like that is kind of my time. Sometimes I'll take the whole Saturday. Like I may have to work, most of my Sunday other than when the Saints play, but I'll watch college football all Saturday because with my kids, and that's just what I want to do. That is a stress reliever for me. You need to actively dedicate that time for yourself. Find out what it is. You're not gonna be able to do everything that you used to do just because you're gonna have more roles and responsibilities. But find those aspects that are key to you and make sure you dedicate that time so you can engage in those. I don't know if anyone else has any kind of personal stress management items that you'll use.
So I've got one or a couple. So on a daily basis, I do try, like, right, the day goes, it happens, and you realize, like, oh, I eat every, meal at my computer, just me and this computer. And so for dinner, I try to, like, I cook probably like 3 times a week. And then I do like to take the time to, like, actually, like, enjoy my food without a computer sitting in front of me. Yes, if we're close on a deal, right, that gets thrown out the window some. But to the extent that things aren't totally on fire, like, having that decompressed transition, even if I'm going to do some work after it, is super helpful. So a way to, like, actually transition your day out of, like, I'm in peak stress at all points in times to getting less stressful. And then to Justin's point, having some things that you love. So one thing that I've been doing this past year or so, I guess right at a year, is that I loved reading, right? Part of that's why I became a lawyer. I love to read. I was a kid who read 100 books every year. Like, I was a voracious reader. And that has very much so stopped since becoming an attorney, because, right, all we do is read all the time. So that has stopped in large part. I still listen to a lot of audiobooks, but the reading part. So I joined a book club that's very women specific, and it's people who are vice principals of schools, they're engineers, right? We run the gamut, and having to be accountable to that group. We do 10 books in 10 months. So you've got a book a month, and then we meet, and it is not a book club that's just for wine. Like, there will be discussion, you will be on call. Like, having that kind of responsibility partner has gotten me back to being like, I've sat down and read a book. This is actually really nice. Just having something that breaks up your life and gets you away from, I'm only with lawyers, I'm only doing work. So those two have been nice. Something daily, and then something that you want to probably, at this point, you guys will figure it out, need to reintegrate back into your life.
I love those suggestions. And on the note about reading, my wife also joined like a book club, and like she's also a lawyer at a big law firm, same exact like reasoning. And it's been a huge game changer for her. They always make it like themed based on the type of book they're reading when they like meet up and they discuss it. It's a lot of fun. So totally agree with those. I would say one sort of just general at-home stress management technique is taking advantage of the free time when you have it. I think with our jobs, especially with litigation, tends to be very, very cyclical. So, you'll have extreme peaks and valleys where, you have a bunch of big filings or a trial coming up, and you might work an outrageous amount of time in the course of 60 days, right? But then, in the post-trial lull or the post-hearing lull or whatever, you're going to have a lot of free time, and you're going to like have this realization where like, oh my God, 8 hours of day after your working day is done. That's a lot of time, and take advantage of that. Don't waste that. Find the stuff that's important to you. Spend time with your family if that's important to you, like exercise, whatever it is. Take full advantage of it, because you're going to be busy again sooner than you realize it, and then it'll disappear like dust in the wind. So definitely agree with all that, but like also just on a macro level, make sure to appreciate the value of time when it's presented to you, because it's not always going to be presented to you.
Exactly, and that's Nish. That's a great point. And I'm a litigator by trade, so but I think and I'll let Wendy and Tamika correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's very similar in the corporate and transactional aspect. I mean, it was always described to me because I'd have those, you'd have a big project like Nish is saying, and then you get done, and then there's nothing. It seems like you have nothing to do, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get work again? I'm just never, I'm going to be just have nothing for the rest of my career. And when I started, I would initially kind of freak out when that moment happened, and I'd go to my mentor, and he would always sit me down and be like, the first time he'd tell me, then he just remind me every time, he's like, it's just like a roller coaster. You're gonna be very, very heavy at one point, and then you're gonna come down and you're gonna be on the bottom, and then it's gonna ramp up again, and you need to make sure to take advantage of that time when you're at the bottom. You can go ask for work, but ultimately you're gonna get more. Sometimes I find when I go to ask for work after I have one of those, because I think I'm never going to have any work, all the stuff that had been, there's cycles to even litigation that was on a downtrend and wasn't very active becomes active, and then you ultimately overload yourself, and some of that you'll learn as you go through practice and kind of dealing with it. But that's 100% take advantage of when you do have free time. Don't think you need to fill time just sitting there and doing, enjoy the day, go out to the extent you can. And one thing too that I wanted to make, people I work with generally, they'll know. I mean, I'll leave at, like I said, I want to get home, see my kids. They go to bed early, so I'll try to leave the office around 5:30, 6. I mean, I'll get there at 7:30, but they also know, like, I'm going to get the work done. And sometimes that's you got to build up the credibility to do that. But they'll know the job's going to get done. It may not be done at 5, but it doesn't need to be done at 5 because we're getting to the client the next day. And so, they may get an email from me at 9 because I want to spend time with my kids, or they have a sporting event or a swim meet that I wanted to go to. And just learning to use, all of your day to make sure that you can do what is important to you. Make sure you can prioritize the things that are important to you. So always remember that, but also that gets back to communication. Communicate that with the people you're working with so that they're not, expecting you to be at the office. If it's 6:30 and you're not there because you're working on something for them, they're like, well, where's Joe? They know, okay, well, Joe's, at home or doing this, and he's going to get it to me. It's just going to be, later in the day. It doesn't need to get out today. It's getting out tomorrow. So, let's kind of transition to, we talked about relationship building, and just, this is a broad question, but I think it'll be good because you're going to deal with more senior attorneys, junior attorneys. You're going to deal with kind of both clients. What are some of the tips or tricks you have for kind of finding and nurturing those relationships, both within the firm you're at and with clients or potential clients, and just forming that network? Just what tips or tricks have y'all used throughout your career that you could maybe impart?
I think the easiest one is to get out and meet people, right? Whether you're in your firm or you're talking about externally. I think a lot of times we've been talking about, how do you become the great associate and how do you build your skills and things like that. And I know you guys will hear that and you will assume that you need to be at your desk, ready to work, getting your work done, and so that is certainly part of it, to build your reputation within your firm, with the partners you work with and on your teams. But you have to find the balance to get out there and build relationships, because this entire industry is about relationship building. And so sometimes that's getting up from your desk and going to the break room, right? As summer associates, are you doing your assignments and turning them in timely and being detail oriented, like Wendy said, but also going and meeting people and, at the events and things like that. So this summer is actually a really good way to show you how to balance both sides of this industry, right? You have to build the substantive skills. You have to work great on your teams. You have to do good work. You have to deliver to your clients. But in order to grow from there, it's about who you meet, who you know, and all of those things. And so making sure that you are being seen by your teams, coming into the office. If you have a hybrid work schedule, you're coming into the office, you're going to lunch with people, things like that. And you're volunteering to do some of the outside things, right? There's things like IEL, there's, all kinds of bar associations around here, especially here in Houston. Go to some of those events. Are you going to your law school alumni events? Maybe you can't go to everything, but I'm definitely, when I'll see someone like, oh, I really want to go, and then current me signs future me up for something, and then future me is like, oh crap, I don't really have time to do that. But so you won't be able to go to everything, but find ways to go to certain things and meet people and take a break from your work. It's another self-care type of thing, is taking a step back, like Wendy, not eating dinner at your laptop. Go eat dinner with your colleagues, or go eat lunch with your colleagues and don't eat it at your computer or something like that. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that I learned, is not just, people want me to be great, but that doesn't mean putting my head down and being invisible. That's not the way to succeed here. You do your work, but you get out and you mingle with your colleagues as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one of the key things to that is sort of being open-minded and willing to sort of collaborate and build relationships to everyone at your firm, especially if you're at a big firm, right, that has multiple offices. Those are resources that you can and your clients will expect you to be able to take advantage of. So knowing your, the other associates, knowing the partners, other practices, that's super important. One of the things I like to do is whenever a visiting lawyer comes into a different office, we get like an email to the office being like, hey, like XYZ is visiting from whatever. And if it's someone I don't know or haven't connected with a while, I'll like shoot them an email and be like, hey, do you want to get coffee if you have time, or do you want to, or I'll swing by, their guest office, just say hi, introduce myself if they don't know me. Because those are the connections that you can build, right? And then you never know, 6 months from now, some regulatory issue or something you've never dealt with comes up, but you're like, oh, you know what? John would be great for that, right? I'm going to go see if I can loop in John. And then, you've brought in this great deal of value to your team just by virtue of knowing, your relationships at the firm, right? And if you come into this job with like the siloed idea that like, I'm a litigator in Houston, so I'm going to work only with litigation people in Houston, you're kind of depriving a lot of the value, presumably that you're going to want to bring to the table at a big firm. So that's one of the things I think is very important.
And that's a good point. And we just got a question in the chat and want to kind of building on that, building these relationships. The question is it frowned upon to have, you have your intra-firm mentors, but is it frowned upon to have a mentor at a different firm, potentially even a rival firm? And I was going to start off with, I think the answer is definitely no. Because again, it goes back to those connections, and sometimes those attorneys are referral sources for you. I mean, if they're conflicted out of a case, they got to refer it to someone. And so, this whole profession is about building connections, making connections with as many people as you can. So no, I don't think, at least from my perspective, I don't think it's a problem, even if they're at a quote unquote rival firm, to have that someone as your mentor. I mean, it's just kind of, because you may clerk at different firms, you're going to meet people, you may not go work at that firm, but that doesn't mean that you just cut yourself off from all those connections that you made. You utilize those both as personal growth and professional growth. So I don't know if anyone has any different viewpoints in the group.
Definitely not a different viewpoint. I think we would all agree that it's certainly not. And it's a giant red flag if anyone tells you that it is. You should run for the hills. But I would say people have mentors for very different things, right? I don't have one mentor. I have a ton of different mentors. Like Justin said, I have the personal ones. I have the professional ones. I have the ones who, they have a lot of power in certain places and I need them for certain things. And I have the ones who look like me. And for a while at some of my firms, there was no one in my group who looked like me. So I had to have a mentor for that purpose somewhere else, right? And then you have other buckets, whatever is important to you, you have those buckets of mentors for different things. It's like you have friends for different things and you have doctors for different things. You have mentors for different things as well. And there might not be someone in your firm who fills that particular role. And I think we would all tell you that we've developed mentors all along our career. Wendy and I have moved firms over time. I still am very close to my mentors from Baker Botts, who, when I was a junior lawyer, they raised me as a baby lawyer. And so the first speaking engagement that I got as a fourth-year lawyer, I had already left Baker Botts, but I got it from those women that were my mentors at Baker Botts. And if someone at my next firm had told me, oh, you can't talk to them, I would have missed out on that opportunity. And so absolutely not. It is no huge deal to have mentors from all portions of your journey. And you should keep those people around because people move around. Someone goes in-house, they might become a client. And so it's just really short-sighted to think that you would cut off someone because they're at a rival firm or a rival organization.
One, I want to shift to, and we kind of talked about, Tamika, you talked about kind of volunteering for, I think you mentioned organizations during nurturing relationships. In your and I know we've got a bunch of different industries, practice groups, so there'll be a wide swath of these. But what are some of the professional organizations that y'all have joined in your career that you found most helpful to both to your professional growth and just kind of furthering your career? If you could maybe provide some of those just for practical advice for everyone.
Yeah, so for me, for career purposes, I think one in joining the environmental bar in the state obviously was very important to me. So the Texas State Bar section on environmental and natural resources was huge for me to join. That was one of the reasons I got the speaking engagement that I got as a fourth year, because my mentors were on the board. And then once I did the speaking engagement, I was actually appointed to the board for a 3-year term. And it just lets me know what's going on in the bar. And to our last point, we were talking about relationship building. It's very important for me as an environmental lawyer in Texas to know who the other environmental lawyers are. People get conflicted. I do transactional law, others do litigation. And so sometimes we have to refer clients, by firm. And I think it's very helpful to know who's doing what, and it helps us stay on top of things and things like that. And then as a Black female partner, it's very helpful for me to understand what other people are experiencing and what they're doing. And so I will try to join certain affinity group related bar associations. And so those two in particular, career-wise, are very important for me. And then I like to stay involved in the community too, just because I think, again, it's another break from the law. So for me, that has been both staying active in the graduate side of my sorority and joining Junior League. So both of those two organizations have been great for me on the community side, but also it's a great benefit for, professional work, because again, like Wendy's book club, there's everybody there. It's not just lawyers. And so it gives you an opportunity to meet people outside of your industry who may or may not one day become a client. So for me, those kind of 3 buckets of organizations have been very helpful to my career.
Yeah, I was totally agree with all those. I will just plug, not to, I don't want to overlap the same things that have been said. I will also plug internal stuff at your firm in terms of, being a good firm citizen, join committees, and trust me, you'll have plenty of opportunity to do stuff like that. Join committees, join causes that are important to you. Like, if you are really actively involved in recruiting and you want to make sure, you can sort of guide the future of the firm, or, join the summer committee, or, if your firm has one, or an employment committee, affinity groups within the firm. Presumably all these sort of big law firms are going to have, practice, sometimes practice specific groups, like, if you're construction, litigation, or energy law, or whatever it is, right? But also sort of more socially focused things like, affinity group, like I'm part of the South Asian and APA group at Baker Botts. Those are just ways to stay connected to the community. Obviously, all the external ones are super important too, but your firm will also have internal resources that you should take advantage of.
The only additional color I'll add to what was said was to ask the people you work with, right? Like, you get there, you're new, figure out what everybody else is doing, because you probably need to be doing the same thing. So, right, I'm a healthcare lawyer. So if you're a healthcare lawyer and that's truly what you do, you're a member of American Health Law Association, which is a national organization, right? Figure out what everybody is doing. Like, you can literally ask them, oh, what are you involved in? Why do you do that? And the same goes for, and I know we haven't jumped there yet, but what are people reading, right? You want to figure out what the people who are in the job that you want to be in, what they do and why, and then you want to go and do the same thing, right? It's very much a profession of trained on the ground. So just make sure you're doing that, and you'll figure it out much faster that way than it having to like magically come across your desk one day. So
yes, that's a great point, Wendy. And that gets back to that attitude that we talked about at the start, showing the willingness, the wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to become, further your professional growth and personal growth. One thing too, I was gonna say with the intra-firm committees and those are great too in terms of establishing those relationships that we talked about, because you're gonna meet people across offices, people you may not work with at all in your career, substantive work wise, but you're going to meet them because you're going to have meetings, you're going to have events, and that just helps build you and ingrain you into the firm that you're at, which only helps you in terms of your career and growth at the firm. And Wendy, you referenced it. What are some of we talked about organizations, but what are some of the, I won't get into news sources because that always becomes more of a contentious issue, but what are some of the sources y'all use for legal specific information about your industries? I know, Wendy, you have healthcare. What are some of the, are there some publications that you're normally reading to get an update on whether it's the regs or the law in terms of healthcare? Let's start with you.
Yeah, so there is Law 360, which I feel like, but I don't really know, has all the industry covered. So like looking at Law 360 every morning. The government, if you are in something that is highly regulated, more likely than not, the agencies that you care about are putting out publications themselves. So HHS, OIG, CMS, I get all their notices every day. Something that's important to me because I do fraud and abuse work is they tell you like there is a list, pretty much like 4 to 5 every day, where they're like, so and so got charged $10 million for X thing, right? You can see all the press and public announcements, and I can look at it, go in there and say, okay, it was about this. And then I can go and ask our library to pull the filing for me, right? I don't do litigation, but that filing that the government did tells me a lot about what activity they were looking for. And then I've got some stuff on the compliance side that I read every day, and then general newspaper reading. You should just be up on the news. I think I learned that no matter what your news source is, when I first got started. So just understanding you need to be able to talk about what's going on in the world. And then you need to know if there's something really big going on in your industry right now for healthcare. Private equity is being closely watched. FTC, Lena Khan is bringing cases. And if you don't know that, like, where have you been? Like, you're not doing the job. So just make sure you're getting lots of sources of information, both trade publications and then just general news, because they pick up on stuff too.
And that's actually a great, I was going to highlight that too. Sometimes I do more of energy, whether it's litigation or regulation. And so, if there's an interesting article that I see, I'm in Louisiana and carbon capture, and that's what I do. It's a big hot button issue. And so whether it's the legislature overall, and so if I see an article in the local paper, I'll forward it to the partners I work with. Hey, and I'll say, hey, I'm assuming you saw this, but just wanted to send your way some of the more senior partners that I work with on this stuff. And just again, we're getting back to that attitude of, and those are the people that you want to work with, the people who are very interested in it. That show that interest, that show that they're trying. So sending internal. Sometimes we'll send articles to clients too. If it's a hot button issue for them and we see in local paper, we'll shoot to the client and say, hey, just want to make sure you saw this, and then maybe provide a little color to it. But it again, it shows the client that we're keeping up on them and making them a priority to us, which is something you'll be dealing with more when you get senior, but that's just another, internally your clients when you start are going to be the partners you're working with. So you kind of want to start doing that for them. Anyone else have any sources that they kind of rely on?
Yeah, I think all those are great. I also think as a litigator, if you're going to practice in certain courts, you can subscribe to court updates that'll tell you like these are the recent filings in Harris County, these are the recent filings in the Southern District of New York, or wherever it is that you may practice. And it's a great resource. Just keep your eye, your eyes peeled for stuff that comes out that is potentially relevant to your practice, because oftentimes people will use that as a basis to reach out to defendants and say, hey, do you need representation, stuff like that. And it also, it's good to just generally know what kind of cases are being filed where you practice, and so that's one addition I would suggest if you're a litigator.
Yeah, and that again, Nish, that's a great point. We have one in Louisiana that we get, and some of it's just seeing, has a case been filed against, whether it's your client or the a client of a partner that sending it to them to, in case they, hey, saw that this was filed yesterday, I'll pull the pleading or send them the pleading, because you'll come to find out, and you may not even notice in lawsuit, but you're going to, the suit will be filed generally before the client's going to know that a suit's filed oftentimes. And so if you can give them the heads up before they get formal service of it from the sheriff or whoever, that just helps overall client relationships. And then again, goes back to showing that interest. And it's simple, you know, it takes probably 5 minutes to go through it. The one we get comes through in the evening at about 8 o'clock. I just quickly go through it and see what's been filed. And that's always just another area that you can kind of set yourself apart too, in terms of going from good associate to a great associate. We've got about 4 minutes left, so I want to thank Nish, Wendy, Tamika. Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate y'all joining. Thank you everyone for attending.